where's the other one? His arms. His arms. Oh, okay, that's why I didn't. She wasn't here yet. Okay. Ms. Collins. Okay, Collins. Ms. Dolinar. Dolinar. Okay. Ms. Guglielmo. Ms. Let's see here. Ms. Hurst. You hear someone? Ms. Hurst. Lauren. Ms. Kwiatkowski. Kwiatkowski. Olivia Kwiatkowski. No. Ms. Nolter. Nolter. Peeler. Ms. Peeler, Lydia. Good, okay. Ms. Pekatowski. Pekatowski. Hello. Ms. Sherwood. Sherwood. Yes, no. Ms. Sangela. Sangela. Ashley. Yes, no. And Ms. Reichard. Ms. Reichard. Oh, okay, good. All righty. Good to see you all again. Now I'm going to move on in this class from the sacred authorities, the oral Torah and the written Torah, to highlighting, as I did with Hinduism, highlighting some of the major beliefs and things that are related to those in Judaism. This is, as you can clearly see, is not the PowerPoint for this class. This is a long time ago when I started out at Iona College, many, many years ago, but you can see it's much more verbose. But I want it because it has this on it. I try to include readings from the primary sources. And I did want to say something about the Talmud, because I don't give it as a reading, but I wanted you to at least see what it looks like and what's going on in the Talmud, because it is so important for Judaism. Because if you're a Christian, then you might have this impression that it's all about the book. The Jews are basically like Christians in that sense, that they have their Tanakh, their version of their Bible, and they read it like Christians, like we do. And no, and that's a very Protestant view, because Protestantism is very focused on Scripture. It's actually Judaism and Catholicism are much more, and Eastern Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, are much more simpatico, one might say, much more in sync. And the idea that for in Eastern Orthodoxy and in Roman Catholicism, you have the idea that, yes, you have a written scripture, but you also have an oral tradition, which is part and parcel of that, and both are relevant to understanding God's revelation to humanity. Same, similar, if not the same idea here. So Talmud is very important, and I want to show you how it works. This is not a complete discussion, but just a section from the Talmud, and it is from a section that's dealing with the Sabbath, Shabbat. Shabbat. Okay? The Sabbath, the Hebrew word for Sabbath. And I know it's from Talmud Bavli. How do I know that? Now that I'm starting to get people's names, I'm becoming dangerous to you. Because I can seek you out, Mr. Krebs. Yes? Yes, I can start seeking people out and asking them questions on the fly. Still don't have to answer it, but if someone would want to, can you tell why it's from Bavli and not from Yerushalmi? Maybe I told you, maybe I didn't. You take a guess. What do you think that little B means in front of Shabbat? You see the little B? That's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's an indicator. What do you think it indicates? You have Talmud Yerushalmi or Talmud Babli? It's an indicator of Babli. A Y, if it were a Y, I would know that it was from Talmud Yerushalmi. But since it is a B, I know that it is a section of the Talmud Babli, Babli Shabbat. And the number tells me not a page number, but a column. So I looked at column 36D in Talmud Babli of Shabbat, and I get this. And I know see here that, the writing is a little bit smaller. I did on another PowerPoint. I made it larger, but I can't use that one right now. Unfortunately, it's not in a proper state yet. I have to edit it. But anyway, you can see enough. What does it look like? Well, first you have on the top the Mishnah, the central core. You have the Mishnah, which states the oral interpretation of the law. In this case, in regard to how does one keep Shabbat according to God's will. And then you have additional comments from Tanaim, the Tosefta. So then what's the Mishnah? Well, this is the Mishnah. Cooked food can be put on a stove that was heated with straw or stubble. Okay, so remember, this is a long time ago. It's not a modern stove. You're thinking of like one of those big oven kind of stoves, and in the bottom, you put wood or kindling and stuff like that, and you would light a fire and it would heat up everything. You might have an orifice for an oven, and then on top, you have the top that would heat up, and you could cook things on the top or heat them up. So this is the question. Cooked food, can it be put on the stove or not? Now, the issue with the Sabbath, with Shabbat, is that it's a day of rest. And so a Jew is not supposed to do any work, certainly not supposed to do any servile work like working a job. But there are other things that a person might do on Shabbat that maybe is not a form of employment, but is servile enough that it could be like work. Okay, so then there are whole sorts of things, an assortment of activities that might be considered work. One of them would be cooking food, making and preparing a meal. You can't do that on Shabbat because God says not to work. He says to rest on the Sabbath day. So you can't actually make a meal, make food, but you could make it before, and this would be a workaround. You could make it before, say, Friday morning or Thursday or something like that in preparation for the evening of Friday when Shabbat starts. And then you could eat the food cold, or you could warm it up, because warming up is not really cooking. You're not preparing a whole meal and cooking it, just warming it up. So that's the question that's going on here. It's saying that you can take food that's been cooked before and heat it on the stove. How do you heat it? With straw and stubble. Now, if the stove was heated with the pulp of the poppy seed, I guess that's a form of oil, or with wood, then cooked food may not be put on it. Unless, here's an exception, qualification, the coals of that stove were taken out and covered with ashes. Okay, so this is the Mishnah. Now we have the Tosefta. Beit Shammai responds to this. Beit, not Beth. Beth is not a girl's name here. It's not short for Elizabeth or Bethany or something like that. Beit actually is Hebrew for house. So the house of Shammai. Shammai is an ancient rabbi, a Tana. Okay, he's one of these ancient Tanaim. So the disciples of Shammai say this, the house of Shammai says this. In the latter instance, meaning, I guess, with the poppy seed and the wood, it is permissible only in the case where food is to be kept warm, but not of such as are improved by continued cooking. So Shammai is saying if you just, in the latter case, I guess in the former case, it's perfectly fine. But in the latter case, where you're dealing with oil and wood, for some reason that's different to them. I don't exactly know why, but in that case, it's permissible only to keep the food warm, but not to continue to cook it. Okay, so you might think, I guess, if I'm thinking about this, like say you prepared food beforehand, but it wasn't cooked yet. So you could say, well, is that permissible? Because I'm not really doing work. I'm not, chopping up food and putting in spices and making stuff. I've already done that work. I've made it, but now I'm just cooking. I'm putting it on and it cooks by itself. That's not work, is it? Well, Shammai says it is. So you can't improve it by continued cooking, at least in the latter instance with using, I guess, poppy seed and wood. In the former instance with straw and stubble, I'm not sure. It's not clear. But Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel, says both alike are permitted. So both are permitted. And here you see a difference between these two Tanas. Okay? I like to say, like, Hillel is happy, or Hillel is the hippie. He's kind of the more easygoing, liberal-minded rabbi. He allows both. Both are permitted. Whereas Shammai is strict. Shammai always is like, you can do this one, but you can't do the other. Okay, the other's forbidden. And they play off of each other, Shammai and Hillel, these two Tanas. So the Tosefta continues. Shammai adds that food may be taken off the stove, but not put back on it. Whereas Hillel the hippie says, Shalom, dude, go with it. Gnarly, babe. No. That's okay, because in like 20 years, you too will be uncool. It just happens, believe it. Unless you're someone like, I don't know, Madonna or Lady Gaga or someone who, but they have stylists and all sorts of people to make them cool. So that's what comforts me at night. So anyway, again, we have Shammai and Hillel. Shammai is strict. So food can be taken off the stove but not put back on it. Why? Because that's work. You're actively doing something. You're physically transferring it from one place to the other. So if you take food off, you can't put it back on. You can't complete it. Whereas Hillel says that's fine. If you take it off, you can put it back on. So here we have the Mishnah and the Tosefta. So that's the core. And now begins the Gemara. This is where the Amora, this is the collection of discussions amongst the rabbis over the centuries that we call the Amoras, who collected all these opinions. And yes, it also mentions the Geonim, the academics, who ultimately compiled the Talmud and add their opinions as well, I guess. But whatever. Anyways, it's a mishmash. So the Gemara comes after that. The schoolmen, the academics, propounded a question. They asked a question. As for the expression shall not put above, does it, referring to the pot that has been taken off the stove, mean shall not put it back? Or does it mean if it has not been taken off, it can be left there? Because shall not put is ambiguous. So they're asking for a question here. Does it mean that you can't put it back if you've taken it off? Or that if it's put there and it's left? What's the meaning of that phrase, shall not put? Okay, that they're asking for clarification. Well, here comes the clarification. Come and hear, come and hear. And this is a recurring refrain, although that's a redundancy, but this is a refrain throughout the Talmud, okay, because it's a discussion of the rabbis to their students. So they're talking to their students and saying to their student, come and hear me, my son. As I explain, there are two parts in the Mishnah. If the point of controversy is leaving the food on the stove, if it was there before, then the Mishnah should be explained like this. On a stove heated by straw or stubble, the food can be left. So I guess that's not an issue. But on a stove heated with oil and wood, the food can only be left if the coals have been taken out or covered. Okay, and I'm not exactly sure why that's so, why that matters, but I'm assuming that maybe they thought it was more an issue of work. If you're putting wood in the stove or using oil for some reason, maybe that changes the nature of what's going, in their minds changes the nature of what's going on. Of course, have to ask a rabbi who's more well-versed in Talmud than I am. But if you take out coals from underneath, which do continue burning. I mean, coals will continue burning. Maybe that's one of the issues, that whereas coals can continue burning for a while, okay, and give off heat, maybe their view is that, well, wood doesn't do that enough, okay? So you have to keep adding more wood, which would then be work, because you have to keep adding more wood to the fire. So they're trying to explain this. What kind of food maybe? So just to summarize that, the leaving of the food on the stove is, it's fine if it's straw or stubble, but in the case of oil or wood, there are issues. What kind of food can be left? They go back to the Tanaim, the Tanas, Shammai and Hillel. Shammai says only food that is to be kept warm, but not to be improved by cooking, and Hillel allows both. Come in here. What does that mean? Such as food that's to be kept warm, but not improved by cooking. Okay. Because you can have, well, anyways, come in here. And this is, at this point, this is where the Talmud starts, kind of turning a person into a neurotic. You can become neurotic trying to figure these things out. This abbreviation R is simply the abbreviation for rabbi, which, like, you have abbreviation for father, FR, for the priest's name, or REV for a reverend. R is the abbreviation for rabbi. So Rabbi Helbo, in the name of Rabbi Hama ben Gurion, quoting Rav, which is a nickname for this guy, Rabbi Abba ben Aricha. Okay, so we've got three people here. It's not ultimately clear exactly who is giving this quotation or saying it, okay? Rabbi Helbo is saying it in the name of Rabbi Hama, but what does that mean? He's saying it in the sense that Hama was his teacher, and he's of the school of Rabbi Hama ben Gurion, so he's saying it in his name, or is he actually reproducing it from his teacher, giving it from his teacher? Who is quoting from Rav? This guy Rav, nicknamed Rav. Is it Helbo himself, or is he quoting from was it Hama quoting Rav? And now we get through Helbo, it's not clear. And then said, who is saying? Is it Helbo, Hama, or Rav? Rav is saying this. I guess, this would be, I would assume it's Helbo, but it's not totally clear. This happens all the time in the Talmud, where sometimes it's pretty clear which rabbi is speaking. But other times you can have one rabbi speaking in the name of another who's quoting somebody else, and it can be easy to kind of lose the plot, as they say, where does this come from? Nevertheless, that's part of the neurotic joy of studying Talmud. I'll say it's Helbo. So what does Helbo say? The Mishnah speaks only about putting food upon the stove. Okay, so getting specification here. The Mishnah is only talking about actively putting food on the stove, but as to putting it into the stove, it is surely prohibited. So now he changes the focus. The Mishnah is talking about just putting stuff on the stove. It doesn't seem to mention putting stuff into the stove. So Helbo is like, well, forget about putting it on the stove. Surely putting it into the oven, that's got to be not kosher. Surely prohibited. Unquote. So if you say the dispute is about returning the pot to the stove, like you took the pot of food off and now you're putting it on, this remark is correct, for there is a difference to what place it is returned. Okay, meaning his remark is correct. It's I guess it's saying you're right, Helbo. It is prohibited to put it into the stove. If it's a matter of returning it to the, you take it off and put it into the stove. You take it off of the stove and put it in. I'm assuming that's what's going on. That's forbidden. But maybe what it's trying to say that if you took it from somewhere else and it wasn't on the stove before, but you put it in, maybe that is, okay. But if the question were about keeping it on the stove while it is there, what difference would it make? Do you think Rabbi Helbo's report refers to the first part of the Mishnah? It refers to the second, in which Hillel allows it to be turned returned. And to this he says, even in this case, upon the stove it is permissible, but not into the stove. Okay, I'm not going to elucidate that because I'm getting tired, baby. And this is just a piece. This is just a taste of what goes on in the Talmud. This whole section goes on and on and on in the Talmud, on this question alone, amongst other questions of how to observe the Sabbath. So you can see they get, I think the word that you hear today is granular. You can see that the rabbis get very granular, and the discussion goes all over the place. Sometimes it's you're following it and it's here, and then all of a sudden it's over there, and then it goes down there, and then it comes back up to where you were. You know, it's a discussion. It's like a discussion. Okay, and the point of it is when you study Talmud as a Jewish man, again, it's not to find order or make conclusions, find conclusions from the Talmud. You are supposed to arrive at your own conclusion, to take even the disagreements amongst the rabbis and to come up with your opinion about what is proper. In the cases where you do actually need a response, then there are mechanisms for that. And if you read the reading, one of the readings that we had, well, that's Torah, but one of the readings from the New York Times, yes, one of the readings is about the wig controversy. The wig controversy, if you know what I'm talking about, that probably means you didn't do the reading. But if you did the reading, you know what I'm talking about. That there is a temple in India, southern India, where women will shave their heads or part of their heads and offer their hair, the shaved off hair, they offer it basically to the god Vishnu, okay? But it has to do with the god Vishnu. One of his many, many, many avatars beyond the several, the 10 that we talked about. And so there's a temple built to this, and women come and, they have so much hair that they export it. Actually, there are a lot of wigs around the world that are made from hair from this one temple because so many people come to it, so many women, and so many women shave off their heads. And so it's a business for the temple. What does that have to do with Jewish women? Well, Orthodox Jewish women, very observant Jewish women, wear wigs, apparently. There is a commandment of God, or at least there's believed to be a command that married women must cover their heads, cover their hair, especially. You're not supposed to show your hair to someone who's not your husband, or I guess your children, but certainly not your husband. And people, it's interesting because people oftentimes associate veils and all sorts of stuff like that with Islam, yes? Islam, you see stuff on the news, some Muslim lady goes to the local division of motor vehicles and they wanted to take off her veil and uncover her face because they got to take the picture of the driver's license, and now all of a sudden you have some whole Supreme Court religious liberty issue, which happened. I believe it was in the state of Florida. I don't know if it got to the Supreme Court, but and I forget. I didn't follow it, so I don't know how they ultimately decided. But I'm just pointing out that people usually think, oh, Islam has that problem. Muslim women do, Muslims. No, and it's not a problem for them. It's not if you ask a Muslim woman if it was a problem, there are plenty who would say, no, it's not. It's part of our religious faith. The same thing goes for Orthodox Jewish women. I don't think conservative women are required or believe that they're required to do it, but certainly amongst Orthodox women. But for whatever reason, Orthodox women, a lot of them don't want to wear veils, so they wear wigs. And from what I understand, I am bald, but I ain't wearing a wig yet. I'm bald. I don't need to wear a wig. I accept it, and I'm not going to shave my head, because that's just a dead giveaway that I'm bald. At least I've got a little bit of hair, so I can hope. Yeah. Anyways, apparently Jewish women, they want to wear wigs, and the best kind of wigs are made, as you might expect, from natural hairs, natural human hair especially. Well, what happened when the Jewish authorities found out that these wigs, that the hair that these wigs were being made out of was coming from an act of worship of what they considered to be a false god, an act of idolatry, these women were offering their hair to the god Vishnu, the question raised was, what do we do about that? Is that a violation of Torah? You know, is that a violation? Is that an act of idolatry according to the law? And so they needed a decision. And so they had mechanisms for that. So you had a rabbi of some group in Israel, some authoritative group, say, you cannot wear wigs that's made with this hair from this Indian temple. If you're a Jewish woman, you can't, because it's the proceeds of an act of idolatry. So as the article said, you had all these Orthodox Jewish women in Brooklyn, but I'm sure it was other places in the United States, but it's from the New York Times, so it's New York centric. And what were they doing? They were running to the wig shops to buy synthetic wigs, or to buy something, what is it called again? It has a weird name, a snood? Is that what it is? Snood? I have no idea what a snood is. I've never heard. I guess it's some kind of, I don't know. It's not a wig, it's not a veil, but it can, I guess it's kind of like what nurses wear at hospitals. I guess you could call that a kind of snood, you know, keeps the hair in a bundle. Anyways. But they couldn't have their wigs anymore, and they had to get rid of the other ones. So there were mass burnings of these idolatrous wigs. Idolatrous wigs. You gotta love religion, right? Even the wigs are idol worshippers. You know? So anyways, so that was what was going on in the article. Sometimes the Talmud is not clear enough. You do need decisions. Okay, so I don't want you to get the impression that it's just like an open-ended question that as you're studying Talmud, that you don't have to really arrive anywhere and you just enter the discussion. No, there are times when there are real practical decisions that have to be made about how to observe the law, because it is the will of God. Yes, there we go. Okay, see this off for 1 second. The beliefs of Judaism. Well, we start with the main belief, two main beliefs, and I've already talked about these, so it'll be familiar. Monotheism and election. But these two beliefs are contained in a statement, a very special statement for Jews, which is called the Shema, the Shema. It comes from the Hebrew verb shama, which means to hear, to listen or to hear. And it comes from the first word of this statement, hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael. Okay, that's what it's taken from, the Shema, from this statement, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. Not sure if anyone would like to read this statement. If you wanted to volunteer, that would be nice. My voice a break, but you're under no obligation. What is the context of this statement? Well, in Deuteronomy, it's the second law. It's Moses, just as the Jews are about to enter their homeland, re-enter their homeland, I should say, Moses repeats the law that was given to him again to the Israelites. And within the context of his repeat of the law, he gives this statement. Would anyone like to read it? Still no? I don't understand how like the medical people are going to do rounds, you know, they're going to all standing there. And who wants to tell me what is the end result of interstitial lung disease? Yeah. Death. You know, death is the answer to everything, right? Just like stress is the answer to every differential diagnosis because it causes just about everything. Anyways. Okay. Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And that's as far as I go, because I never went to yeshiva. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart and with your whole being and with your whole strength. Take to heart these words which I command you today. Keep repeating them to your children. Recite them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lay down and when you get up. Bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. This is the essential statement of faith for Judaism, and it provides us with its unique view of the supernatural. First of all, that there is one only, well, there is a personal God who is one in the sense that he is unique. There is no other. So compare that, for example. It's not exactly the same, but if we compare it, for example, to Hinduism, where you have personal gods and goddesses, but you don't really have one personal god. You have Brahman, but Brahman is more of a divine energy, a divine force. It's not a person. You don't relate to it. To relate to Brahman, you have to relate to it through the gods and goddesses. That's their purpose in Hinduism. But Judaism, no. The divine nature is a personal being, and there's only one. He is unique. And so this idea, you have here this idea of monotheism, that the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. The Hebrew is a little bit ambiguous here. You can't actually capture it exactly in English, as with any language when you're translating, because languages can be so different. But the word echad, one, it can mean either the Lord is our God alone, or it can mean the Lord is one, as in the one and only God. It has a double meaning in Hebrew, okay, a double texture to the word. So it could certainly be read as monotheistic. And monotheism really is what distinguished Judaism from not just the religions surrounding it and its part of the world, but from all the religions that we know of in the world. Okay. Yeah, I mean, religions had ideas of a great spirit or gods and goddesses, but no religion like Judaism came ultimately to this belief that there was one only God and that was it, and no other. So that's something that makes Judaism unique amongst the world's religions. This God that it's referring to is transcendent. Okay, he is above and beyond the whole universe. He's not part of the universe. So think of that when you think about Advaita in Hinduism, where Uddalaka says to his son, you are this is you. You are the seed that is in the fruit. You're basically saying that we're all Brahman in a way. No, God, the God of Israel is transcendent. He is not part of the world. He is not me and I am not him. Okay. No tat tvamasi in Hinduism. That statement doesn't hold. God is transcendent from his creation. He is complete and he's totally perfect. So he doesn't grow. He doesn't feel pain or have human feelings as such. He's perfectly perfect, one might say. Again, think of our experience so far of Hinduism, which I refer to mainly because it's the only world religion where we get that still has that connection to the ancient world and how ancient religions were. Hinduism is still with us today, and it's pretty much the only major religion that has survived from the ancient world with all of these ideas of gods and goddesses. All the other ones, Rome and Greece and stuff, they're gone. Norse religion, although people try to resurrect it, but it's not the same. We have Native American religions and native religions and stuff like that, but not like Hinduism, where this whole system, this ancient system that has been preserved for us, and it's so similar to the surrounding religions that Judaism was interacting with and reacting against, the pagan religions, the religions of the nations. So think about the gods in, say, Hinduism. God, they get born, they can die, they fight, they hurt each other. No, this is not the Jewish God. The Jewish God is perfectly perfect. He doesn't change. He's not born. He doesn't get old. He doesn't die. He doesn't change his form into all different sorts of forms like Vishnu, like in animals and stuff like that. No, 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 no. He's perfect. He's also without a body. He's incorporeal. He has no body, no physical form, which again is very different from, say, a religion like Hinduism, where that precisely, it's expected that the gods would have a physical form because they come out as, they emerge out of Brahman just as everything else does in the universe, in the physical universe. The only difference is that the gods and goddesses are at a higher level of being than humans, but they certainly have a form. Okay, the Israelite God, no, he is not to be, should be no pictures of him because he has no, that's meant to symbolize that he has no form. He is without a body. He is a creator God. He makes the universe. He is the source of existence for the universe. And yet he is distinct from his creation. He's not part of it. Okay, creation doesn't emerge like Brahma, emerge out of him and hence is part of him in some way. No, he creates by his will. Now, in the Bible, we see kind of two views of creation. We see God making things just by his will for Judaism, but also you see kind of an older idea, if you read the Bible, where God makes, but he makes by ordering pre-existing material. He provides order to the universe, and that's how he's the creator. So we see two kind of ideas of creation in Judaism. And he is a good God, which again is for Judaism is kind of revolutionary amongst the religions, because the God, there's no guarantee in a lot of other of the old religions. There was no guarantee that the gods were good. In fact, that was not really a question, you know. In fact, it could be shocking to people that like Zeus or Poseidon or Hera or Aphrodite, the various gods of, say, Greece and Rome, that it was shocking, for example, to the ancient philosophers of Greece and Rome that they did do such bad things and wicked things like human beings. The gods are gods. The gods do what they want to do. Again, even in Hinduism, they're of a higher order of being. So if you get in their way, it's not a matter that the god is good or bad. It's not a question. But if the god needs to move you out of the way, because you're in the, then the god does, because the god can do. It's a higher order of being. So there was not really a question. And then of course you have the bad gods, which we might call demons. For example, in Hinduism, they're called Asuras, but they're not really demons. They're very powerful spiritual beings that are bad. And that's a good thing, actually, because if you remember Dharma, our discussion of Dharma, that is their Dharma. That's their purpose in the created, in the world. So they're supposed to be bad. You expect it from them if they're an Ashura. So very different when you get to Judaism. No, it has to be stated outright that no, God is good. Now, is there evil in the world? Yes, that's recognized, but it's not from God. So where does it come from? Well, that's a question. That's a mystery that has to be dealt with. But what's clear is that the God of Israel is a good God by nature, perfectly good. So there is one God. And as you can also see embedded in that statement of Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, this idea of election, Israel, a covenant, that the Israelites are chosen by this God. And so here's where we come to this idea of a covenant or the covenant. Now we might have come across covenant already before. And the definition of a covenant is simply an agreement or a contract between two or more parties. That's just what it is, okay? If any of you eventually go to law school, I don't think we have anyone who's pre-legal or whatever, but if anyone, whatever. I mean, when you get to contracts, you have a whole course on contracts. Covenant is one of the forms of a contract. It's all it is. It doesn't have any religious connotation, except in this case when we're talking about a special contract made between the God of the universe and these people, the sons and daughters of Jacob, Israel. In that case, we have the covenant. The covenant which is their contract between them and God. The covenant. The covenant is at the heart of Jewish religion, okay, that they are a special people of this one God, okay, that they have a belief that there exists a covenant, a special contract between them and the one God of the universe. How does this agreement, this contractual relationship come about? Well, the Bible gives, from the Jewish story, there are a variety of answers, or I should say several answers, okay? First, we have the person of Abraham. God makes a covenant with Abraham and his descendants. God actively chooses this man, Abraham, same name, it means the same thing, just different forms, and his descendants with which to form a special relationship. And if you are curious, you can look in the book of Genesis in chapters 12 and 13, chapter 15, chapter 17. Okay, there are multiple stories where God appears to Abraham and tells him and reminds him that I'm creating a covenant with you and with your descendants, and I'll do certain things for you. I will make you special. So it begins with Abraham. The covenant per se, the covenant as it comes to become a covenant specifically, is with Moses, our friend Moses. God redeems Israel. Okay, and put that out. I'll say that when I talk about Moses. The story, and if you want to know about that, you look, for example, at the books of Exodus. I say Exodus and Deuteronomy, but you could say Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, actually. I should make that correction to the PowerPoint. The Exodus, which we talked about, okay? So, but, Moses is told by God to liberate the people of Israel and return them to the land of Israel, to Palestine. So God redeems the people of Israel, and in the act of redeeming them from Egypt, he makes a formal agreement with them, more formal than with Abraham, through Moses, where he gives the Torah and he demands observance of the Torah. It is a conditional covenant. God makes promises, he'll do certain things for the Jews as long as they are faithful to the covenant. If they break the covenant, then they will be punished. And that's often where the prophets come in. The prophets are sent by God to remind the people to follow the covenant and to warn them of what might happen if they don't do it. And then finally, King David, there's another covenant established. And this one is rather interesting in that it's, well, maybe I'll come back to that in a second, but it's interesting in the sense that it's different from Abraham and Moses. It's almost like it's predicated on God's relationship with this man, David. So I guess it's kind of like Abraham, God's relationship with Abraham. But King David enters into a special, or God enters into a special covenant with King David. Now, just going back on these, with Abraham, there are signs for each covenant. Each agreement between God and the person is usually marked with a sign. Not always, because as you see with David, there's nothing there. But with Abraham, God promises Abraham that he will be the ancestor of a great nation with a lot of children. He'll have a lot of descendants. So there's that promise, the promise of a large family. God also promises Abraham land. Land is a big issue with Abraham, having a place to settle. And the place that he promises is the land of Canaan, Israel, modern day Israel. That region is promised to Abraham. And God tells Abraham that he will make him a blessing to the world, and doesn't really specify how that's going to be. God is unclear about how Abraham is supposed to be a blessing to the world. And from what I've read over the years or whatever, just picked up from Jewish commentary and Jews talking about this idea. I think what God means, or this idea, or at least how Jews understand it, is that Jews are a blessing to the world through their observance of the Torah. They are kind of like a light or a witness to the world of the presence of God and his goodness in the world. Not that Jews require everyone in the world to become Jews. They don't. The Torah is for them. It's their obligation from God. And you can join them if you want to, but they don't actively ask people to. So how are they a blessing to the world is through their witness of a faithful following of God's law, is how I seem to understand, at least Jews' understanding of what that means for Abraham to be a blessing to the world. The sign of that relationship is circumcision. So where circumcision comes in, which we know from just historical and archaeological records was a cultural practice. There was nothing unique about it for Israel or the Jews. You can find circumcision in many different cultures throughout the world. There's nothing necessarily special about cutting the foreskin off a man's penis. But in the case of Abraham, it becomes a religious sign of this agreement between him and God. In the very flesh of his body and of the body of Jewish men, it indicates their commitment to, their attachment to God and their commitment to follow his law. So that becomes the sign of the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant with Abraham, circumcision, which is inserted in. With Moses, we have a number of things that are signs of that covenant. What God promises, well, with Moses, we actually have clearly this idea that there is only one God and that this God is the God of the Jews. Certainly we have clearly certainly we have clearly the idea that that this is the God of the Jews and the only God they are supposed to follow. There are no other gods that they are supposed to follow. So that's made clear with Moses. Put away any other gods that you might have had before, and we only follow the Lord. So that's something with Moses. And the law, as I've mentioned before, the law, God gives a special law through Moses that Jews are supposed to follow to show the relationship, okay? To show the following of the law is kind of the sign, I guess you could say, and all of its rules is the sign of that relationship. What does God promise? He promises victory over enemies, which makes sense because the Jews are returning to their homeland. They're returning to the land of Israel with Moses. And although Moses doesn't actually get there, and well, actually none of the first generation actually gets there, but eventually they do. But they're returning to a land that's already populated and with people who may not want them to be there, so they have enemies. So there's this promise to Moses and to the people that God will defeat their enemies and that they will have peace and prosperity if they follow his law, or they will be cursed. We also start to see with Moses, as part of this covenant, the beginning of a sacrificial system, the offering of physical worship to their God, which will ultimately end up in building an actual building called a temple. So we have a sacrificial system starts. And the sign, the clearest sign, well, I should say that. I said there are multiple signs. So we have, what do we have? We have a number of things that are signs here of this covenant. There are a lot of things going on. First, we have the Passover, which is not on the PowerPoint, but I write it over there on the board. Passover, which is the Jewish festival, which celebrates this event. It celebrates the event of the Exodus. It celebrates the event of the Exodus. Actually, I wrote Passover on there, but you know what are you gonna do? Passover celebrates the event of the Passover. Well, that's true actually, but it's tautological. You need the Exodus. I want to do that. You have the Passover, which is the celebration of this event, the exodus out of Egypt, the giving of the law through Moses. In Hebrew, it's called Pesach, which means exactly what the English means, that is Passover. Which means what? What is passing over? Well, it has to do, at least in the story, to God himself or God's spirit passing over the land of Egypt and killing the firstborn of all the Egyptians' children, both of men and also of beasts. So even the Egyptians' animals suffered from that. Why did the God of the Israelites do that? Because the Egyptians would not allow them to leave. And so in order to force them to leave, God starts to punish Egypt and passes over the land during the night, one night, and does all this killing. And the Egyptians are so destroyed by it and devastated emotionally from all that death that they finally tell the Israelites, get out. We're tired of you. Your God's just causing trouble. Get out and go away. And so the Exodus is able to occur. So the Passover remembers that. It remembers that event, the passing over of God over Egypt. The passing of God over Egypt, I should say. And it is the best known of all Jewish festivals. It's celebrated every year and celebrating their deliverance from their slavery. It's not celebrated at the synagogue. Passover is celebrated in a Jewish home. It's in the house. It's not celebrated anywhere like in the synagogue. And, what do? They basically retell the story and remember what happened. They eat certain types of food that remind them of the story, like roasted lamb, might also be boiled, but I think it's definitely roasted lamb. They eat certain herbs that remind them of the story. They sing songs, and they retell the story of their deliverance from Egypt. At one point, the youngest child in the home, or somebody, I don't know what you do if you don't have any children yet, or if you have a baby, you can't talk. But, the youngest child traditionally will interrupt or in the middle, around the middle of the service, will say to the father, Father, why is this night more important than any other night of the year? And that opens the door or gives the father the cue to retell the story of the Exodus and how the Jews went from slavery to freedom. Traditionally at the table, a seat is left empty with a glass of wine in front of it, and that's for the prophet Elijah. The prophet Elijah, this ancient prophet of Israel, is believed by Jews to be like the herald. He will come back before the time of the Messiah to announce the coming of the Messiah. And so to remember that, you never know which Jewish door he's going to knock on. So every Jewish house has to have a chair prepared with the wine and the empty chair, so you can offer a chair to Elijah just so, if he happens to show up at your house, it's a Jewish house, he might show up. You never know. It might be your house. You want to be ready. So you have that ready. And also on every Sabbath, there's a chair left or a space left for Elijah. So this messianic theme, this idea of the coming of the Messiah, is recurring every week with Jews. They're reminded of it. So the celebration of the Passover is a sign for the Mosaic covenant, the covenant with Moses. This is the holiday that celebrates it. Some other things are signs, the Sabbath and kashrut. I'll talk about kosher observance later, but kashrut is the name for the system of clean and unclean foods in Judaism, or clean and unclean practices. It doesn't necessarily refer to food, but it's most often connected with food. But I'll talk about that later. But so there is a whole system that's developed of food laws and dietary laws, which is associated with the Mosaic law. And beside Passover, the other major festival is the Sabbath, this seventh day of the week, and that's what Shabbat means. It means seventh in the language of Hebrew, seventh. So the seventh day of the week is a week in which Jews are not supposed to work. So again, it's a sign of their commitment. Commitment to what? Well, the story of the creation of the world. God creates over 6 days, And on the seventh day, he rests. He takes a break. He sees that his work is good and very good. And so he rests, and he blesses the seventh day as a day, as that day when his creation shall rest as well. And so as a sign of that, the Jews rest. They do not work in imitation of their God. The Sabbath. So the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant, a very important sign. And as I think I showed you from our reading from the Talmud, there are a lot of minute rules, a lot of minutiae about how to observe the Sabbath because it is so important. So that's Moses. I mentioned King David. King David, again, God makes a covenant with this man David. And if you're curious, you can look in the second book of Samuel, chapter 7. However, I should have also put on the PowerPoint, there are two other places. The covenant that's mentioned here, this agreement that is recited in Samuel, is actually repeated in the first book of Chronicles, chapter 17. And that's by design, because well, maybe not that. I say that, but well, anyway. Stories from the two books of Samuel and the two books of Kings are actually repeated in the two books of Chronicles. Some author, Jewish author, came back later on, and decided to retell the story of David and the Jewish kings again with his own agenda. And so you find that in the first book of Chronicles and the second book of Chronicles. Hence, the covenant made in 2 Samuel is repeated. The story is told again in 1 Chronicles. But there's also Psalm 89, which I think I might have put in the reading. Psalm 89 contains a song wherein it outlines the covenant to David. And some biblical scholars actually think that is the kernel, that is the original source of the story in 2 Samuel chapter 7. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, it tells a prose version, it's like a story, whereas Psalm 89 is giving the original poetic oracle from the prophet, wherein God makes his own covenant, not with the people of Israel, but with the people of Israel through this one man. God promises David that his kingdom will last forever. That is the sign of his covenant, that your throne will never end. It will be eternal. However, we know from Jewish history that it did not continue, that in 587, yes, the descendant, the kingship of David, the kings that came after him, descended from him. That kingdom ended. The kingdom of Judah was destroyed by the Babylonians, so it did not continue. It was not so then the Jews had to ask, how could it be eternal? Because God said that's what it would be. Here's where this idea of a future David comes in. And David will come back in one of his descendants, a Mashiach, an anointed one like David. Okay, so the sign of the covenant for David, I guess you could say, would be the Messiah, the development of this idea of the Messiah. And forget about a new covenant with Jeremiah. This is I'm using stuff from old PowerPoints just to help me out so I don't have to rewrite them all the time. So the new covenant I'm not going to worry about. I'm just going to focus on when I say with David. So that's interesting. Let me see my page here. And I'm going to do that's Maimonides. I haven't gotten there yet. Okay. All righty. I think that's where I want to stop now. So I will wish you all a good spring break, a good, safe spring break. I hope you have a good time and have some time to rest and relax sometime. And God bless you all. Thank you. Well, if I was here late.
I went to the
Yes, miss.
Writing Center to figure out how to cite those philosophy notes.
Okay,
They
good.
had me put it in APA. I know that on your syllabus you have the top like left corner for like the name of the paper and the word count, but in an APA there's a title like page. So do you want me to leave it like that, or do you want me to put that information that's on
Don't
the
follow,
page?
yeah, no, just use the APA for like if you're using a works cited page or a
Okay,
bibliography.
so don't worry about like the title page or anything
The title page, just do it as I ask it to be done.
in the left-hand corner.
Yeah, just as
Okay.
it says. And for a work site, for citing the works, if you want to use APA, that's fine.
Okay,
It should-
thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, quick.
Yes,
question.
miss.
So would you want us, like what we get off your PowerPoints, would you want us to cite that? Or would that just kind of be like common knowledge for the paper?
No, if you cite something that's not your own work, you need to give credit for it.
Okay, how would I do like a PowerPoint though?
I would say go online. Go online and look it up. You gotta,
Can I
because,
do a PowerPoint? Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't even
you-
know there was a thing to do.
oh yes, they're stuff for citing anything. So yeah, if you're
Okay.
citing class
But then I'm going to
notes,
Student Success Center too. I want to see how, because I'm going to do, I think I'm going to use the sources of the Catechism and the World Religions
okay.
textbook. So I'm just going to double check. I did it. I just want to make sure it was right. But I just want to make sure, I just want to clarify and make sure I understand what like everything means. So like the, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Jnana Yoga.
Jnana Yoga, yes?
Yeah, that one is, what is it, knowledge?
Yes.
So basically, so I'm just gonna explain it and see like if it makes sense. So basically that's like, what is it? I have like achieved through meditation. It's like an act of focusing on one's inner mind and thoughts in order to achieve spiritual enlightenment.
Okay.
That's all we really need to know. Like that's for like like regulation, right? Like I don't,
Well, what's the purpose of it? If you don't mind, I'm gonna take off my mask.
no, you're fine.
Well, what's the purpose of it? Okay, you're
I think that's why I'm
defining what it
confused, like,
is.
why, like, the purpose of meditation, like,
Well, didn't I talk about what its purpose was?
yeah, I even, like, rewatched your PowerPoint last night to go over it, and,
You rewatched the PowerPoint or the video? Or you looked at the PowerPoint?
or, rewatched your lecture. I wrote everything down that you,
Okay, and what did I say that was the purpose? Did I say anything?
I don't really have anything else down, that's all I have. I mean, I guess I'll rewatch,
Those are your notes from the lecture, from what I said, or those are your notes?
that was from last night, because I wrote stuff in the lecture, but I thought maybe there's something I missed from the lecture, and then I rewatched the lecture, and I didn't really get anything else.
Interesting. Let's see here.